Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The British High Commissioner, other members of the diplomatic corps, development partners, senior government officials, both from Fiji and of course outside of Fiji, the NGO and civil society representatives, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, my apologies for the delay. I'm actually not feeling too well, and of course after this I have to go to Parliament. So this is much better surroundings for me before I get into Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, we're delighted to be here today to open the Third Pacific Regional Dialogue on National Determined Contributions, or NDCs, and the Consultations in the Regional Pacific NDC Hub. These are two major opportunities to support the implementation of more ambitious NDC action throughout the Pacific and continue the impressive legacy of achievement we share as Pacific nations in confronting the reality of climate change. A legacy that we built upon side by side during the Fijian presidency of the COP23 negotiations in Bonn, Germany this year. Our presidency is a Pacific presidency. It is a presidency that is taking the perspective of small island developing states to the center stage of international climate discourse. And it is a presidency that is consistently pushing the implementation of the Paris Agreement's most ambitious goal of limiting global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Realizing that ambitious target will require global emissions of greenhouse gases to reach net zero in just a few decades by 2050 at the latest. As part of the campaign, we plan to make the 1.5 degree target an integral part of the Talanoa Dialogue on Climate Ambition. This dialogue is based on the participatory and inclusive Talanoa process of decision-making, devoid of finger-pointing, that is shared among many of us in the Pacific. The dialogue was launched at the COP23 negotiations, and the Fijian and Polish presidencies will partner in the initiative at COP24. Through the dialogue, we plan to accelerate climate action through greater ambition in our NDCs to reduce carbon emissions and help adapt vulnerable economies to climate impacts. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, we all know that the full implementation of the Paris Agreement is critical for the secure future of every person on Earth. And we know that our success in that regard is tied to our progress in realizing the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. When we realize greater ambition in our NDCs, we also accelerate our progress towards realizing the Sustainable Development Goals, as these targets share inherent linkages with one another. So it is in everyone's interest that we pursue more ambitious NDC action in the Pacific, and that we encourage that same spirit of ambition and commitment everywhere else in the world. Unfortunately, as we know it, the current collective commitments set out in international NDCs fall far short of what is required. They have the world on track to a catastrophic warming of 3 degrees or even higher, which would devastate vulnerable nations and people around the world. This is why we must continue to demand and deliver even stronger NDCs from the global community. That commitment and urgent sense of urgency led Pacific leaders, members of civil society and the private sector to make a united call for a regional facility to attract investment to support the implementation of Pacific NDCs at the Climate Action Pacific Partnership Conference held late last year in July, right here in Suva. We are extremely proud to have answered that call at COP23 with the launch of the Regional Pacific NDC Hub, and we are grateful to the Global NDC Partnership, the German, British and Australian governments, and our other development partners for providing the initial resources to establish the hub, along with every country represented here today, for their support towards this regional dialogue. Together, we are going to utilize this hub to accelerate flows of public-private finance to every Pacific Island country. Finance of both a concessional and non-concessional nature. And together, we are going to pursue new approaches and innovative strategies that can make our region an example to the world in adapting to climate impacts and pursuing sustainable development. We know the reality we face. We pointed out that reality repeatedly on the global stage. We in the Pacific contribute the least to the harmful emissions causing climate change, but we stand to lose the most from climate-related impacts. In fact, all of us are only one severe weather impact away from losing decades of development in a matter of hours. Make no mistake, every nation on Earth is put at risk by our changing climate. But Pacific nations face an extreme and unique vulnerability that must be reflected in our NDCs. Our NDCs must be focused on greater ambition, and they must build our overall resilience to the increased flooding, the rising seas, and the more frequent and more severe cyclones that are already causing immense destruction around the region. This regional Pacific NDC hub gives us all a formidable tool in that regard. It will allow us to share knowledge, experiences, and best practices that are tailored to the challenges we in the Pacific face and within our own nations. And in wielding this tool, we need to place ourselves on the cutting edge of new strategies in adaptation, and we must become incubators for new and innovative approaches that build resilience and protect our development. When we achieve that, the world will look to us as leaders, not only as those who are most vulnerable, but as those who are boldest and most innovative in adapting to a changing environment. Of course, we need to make preparations of our own to lay the groundwork for greater public and private investment. We need dedicated leadership and a higher level of collaboration between our countries and within our governments to implement, review, and enhance our NDCs. In many cases, that will require reforms at the domestic level. The effective implementation of our NDCs needs to be supported by a shared evidence base and by our financial institutions, our tax systems, our legal and policy frameworks, and our systems of insurance. Just as the effects of climate change are wide-reaching, affecting every aspect of our development, so must be our collective response, and we must involve every sector of our economies and every level of government in meeting our commitments under the Paris Agreement. We have seen some successes in that aim here in Fiji, and we've built a wealth of knowledge that we are keen to share with our Pacific partners and the wider global community. In partnership with the World Bank, Fiji has undertaken a climate vulnerability assessment of economic sectors that are most vulnerable to climate impacts, and we've laid out a game plan for climate sensitizing our development aspirations over the next 10 years. This assessment is providing us with facts and hard evidence that is informing our climate-related expenditures and allowing us to craft a more ambitious and effective NDC. We've also developed an NDC implementation roadmap with the support of the Global Green Growth Institute, and which we formally launched during COP23. The roadmap, ladies and gentlemen, is focused on electricity generation, transmissions and distributions, demand-side energy efficiency, and energy efficiency in land and maritime transportation, all to support Fiji's commitment to achieve 100% renewable energy and reduce CO2 emissions by 30% by 2030. We've also successfully launched a $100 million Fijian green bond, the first in any emerging economy and the third ever in the world. The first tranche of the bond received a phenomenal response from local and foreign investors. The green bond proceeds are being used to finance climate adaptation and mitigation projects that are critical to achieving our NDC, and we are very excited that our Honourable Prime Minister will actually be opening the London Stock Exchange next month when Fiji's green bond will be listed there. We are also excited that our Fijian Development Bank has achieved great Green Climate Fund accreditation and is looking to scale up its accreditation to assist investments not just in Fiji but throughout the Pacific. We are also pursuing innovative new partnerships, such as the proposed revolving fund for renewable electrification of communities in Fiji in partnership with the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation. Under the project, communities that are currently rely on fossil fuel or cannot be connected with the national grid in the medium to long term will gain access to reliable renewable energy. We've implemented an environmental and climate adaptation levy that includes a 10% levy a 10-cent levy on plastic bags, along with additional levies on vehicles with engine size over 3,000 cc, yacht docking fees, individual income earnings of over $270,000, and prescribed services such as hotels, restaurants, cinemas, and tour services all have a 10% tax on it as far as ECAL is concerned, or Climate Adaptation Levy. Proceeds from this levy are being put into a ring-fenced account that is also being used to finance climate adaptation and mitigation projects. In fact, by law, ladies and gentlemen, as passed by Parliament, we can only spend the monies in climate-related areas. So we actually have a trust account, and we have to publish on a regular basis where all these monies actually have been spent. They must only be spent in areas such as environment and climate adaptation. Fiji is also undertaking a review of our legal framework to make sure it is ready and able to support greater investment in key areas such as renewable energy and transportation in line with our NDC. As mentioned in Parliament last week, we have launched the Pacific Climate Finance and Insurance Facility, or the DRUA incubator, with important seed funding from the Government of Luxembourg and support from the Asian Development Bank. Working with and building on other regional initiatives, the DRUA incubator will, among other initiatives, work towards the development of insurance products targeted towards low-income households and farmers that, once piloted, can in fact be scaled up to other Pacific Island countries. And there are people here from our team that would love to talk to you about that also. The incubator will also focus on the development of transformational and scalable initiatives to increase the flow of climate finance, especially from the private sector, for adaptation. We in Fiji are fully committed to working alongside all of you through this regional NDC hub to share more of our experiences, good and bad, in our journey to implement and raise the ambition of our NDC. And in the true spirit of Talanoa, we look forward to working with all of you to use this NDC hub to take on the knowledge and experiences of our member countries, institutions, and Pacific regional experts to massively boost the implementation of Pacific NDCs as a whole and generate even greater political will for more ambitious NDC action throughout the Pacific. And that, combined with a new level of effort and commitment around the world, will help us achieve the 1.5-degree target of the Paris Agreement that is so critical to our secure future. Our commitment since the very beginning of COP23 presidency has been to work with all of those willing to take action in our campaign for decisive climate action. We've made great progress so far in the presidency, and we need to take full advantage of opportunities such as these events to build upon our achievement all the way up to the handover of the presidency to Poland at COP24 and beyond. Before I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to acknowledge the tremendous support given towards this important regional dialogue from the German government, the European Union, the Japanese Ministry of Environment, the Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment, the NDC Partnership, the Pacific Community, the Secretary of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, and the United Nations Development Program. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for your participation. I wish you well in your deliberations. Indeed, I wish you a very good day and a very good week. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll sit up here for 2 minutes.